Hi, and welcome to the Grind Academy podcast. My name is Rob Patterson, and not so long ago, I traded my suits, my tuxedo, and a comfortable CEO lifestyle to become an entrepreneur. I now speak internationally. I've written a book, I created a clothing brand, and started the Grind Academy podcast. I started the podcast with one purpose in mind: to be a platform for sharing experiences and practical life skills not taught at school. Growing up, I relocated several times and often struggled to fit in at new places. My academic grades suffered, and eventually I finished school without a formal education. I did graduate, however, from the Academy of Life and eventually became CEO for one of Great Britain's largest hotel chains. It was practical life skills, learning to dream limitlessly, and consistent grind that guided me on my journey. That's why each week I'm introducing experienced and talented minds from sport, business, literature, and science who have gained invaluable life learnings. I want to share their stories as practical life lessons you can learn from and apply to your own personal situation. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Now let's hear about today's special guest. There are moments in life when we come across someone who is capable of changing the world. Those changes have historically been through the development of physical things: the motor vehicle, the jet plane, the internet, a cure for a disease, or more recently, a vaccine. My next guest has spent a lifetime at the coalface of disagreement, and after years of study and research, has cracked the code of a human emotion which is the source of so much despair. Douglas Noll has developed a remarkable technique to calm an angry person in 90 seconds or less. Whilst requiring precision, training, and practice, the technique is magically simple and effective. It's already being used around the world in prisons with incredible results. You have to hear the stories of success to believe them. Guys, this podcast and Doug's story is mind-blowing and has enormous potential in the workplace, at schools, at home, in policing, practically any part of life. This should definitely be taught at school. I want to say, grab a notebook and settle in for 45 minutes of life-changing content. This podcast is all about real practical experience gained from the Academy of Life, of which Doug has an abundance of. Let's welcome Douglas Noll to the podcast. Doug, thanks for coming on to the Grind Academy. I appreciate you joining the podcast today to talk about this incredible technique you've developed over many years. A question I ask all guests on the Grind Academy is for 3 things they wish they were taught at school but weren't. And almost always, understanding emotions appears as one of the answers. So if we could just start there, just by understanding what brought you to the point today where you've written a book and dedicated so much of your life to the topic of anger, and more specifically, de-escalation?
Well, it was a long journey. I started my career as a trial lawyer, and for 22 years, I tried a lot of different kinds of cases as a commercial and business trial lawyer in Central California. And along the way, ultimately became fed up with the adversarial nature of trial work. I was fighting my clients, fighting my partners for money, fighting opposing counsel, the courts, and I just got tired of it. And so in mid-career, I made the decision to go back to school and earn my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And I became a peacemaker and a mediator. And one of the things that I did not learn in my graduate studies was how to calm people down. I mean, they use the old active listening stuff, but we all know that doesn't work. So I started studying neuroscience in the mid-1990s, long before anybody knew what neuroscience was. And I really became a student of emotions and how peace and conflict operate in our human brains. And so that's what got me started and interested in it, because I realized that everything starts with the brain in terms of how we respond to our environment, especially in social situations. And ever since then, I went all the way back to object relations theory, which was post-Freud back in the 1930s and 40s, and just studied the development of theories of emotions in psychology and in science, especially neuroscience, and became a lay expert at it. And eventually that led me to develop a set of innovative skills that allows anybody to calm any angry person down in 90 seconds or less.
Well, I mean, very quick synopsis there of how you arrived at this point. There's so many things that I want to discuss with you. That you've got the Prison of Peace project, which I want to get to shortly as well. But one of your a book that you've actually won awards for, De-escalate: How to Calm a Person in 90 Seconds. I mean, people should go out and buy the book. So let's not give the whole book away. But if let's talk about that subject. We've all had an angry boss, or even an angry employee, or we've become angry ourselves at a certain moment. What is the secret behind it? What is the neuroscience behind it in order to manage that?
Well, let me start off by just explaining how you do calm somebody down in 90 seconds or less, and then I'll explain why it works. Mm-hmm. And I won't get too geeky, because I see people's eyes glaze over too often when we start talking about what's going on in the brain. But it's a 3-step process. If you're confronted with an angry person, the first thing you have to do is learn how to ignore those angry words. It's just noise. Just ignore them. You've heard angry words before. There's nothing here that you need to hear again. And the reason that you want to ignore the words is so that you don't get triggered yourself. So it's just white noise. Then the second thing you're going to do is you're going to read this angry person's emotions. And they're not only angry, they've got 6 or 7 other emotions that are going on at the same time. And the beauty is our brains are hardwired to be able to read another person's emotions effortlessly and quickly and accurately. And all we do is sit in silence for just a matter of seconds, and let your brain do the processing, and into your consciousness will come the words, the emotions that the other person is experiencing. And then the last step, which is where the secret sauce is you're going to reflect back the emotions that come into your head, into your consciousness, with a you statement. So I would say something like, Rob, man, you were really pissed off. You're really angry. You're frustrated. You don't feel appreciated. Nobody's listening to you. You feel abandoned and betrayed. And the whole thing is really making you sad. And you're worried and concerned, and it really, really pisses you off. You're really angry. Now, what happens when I do that? When I did that to you, even though you're obviously not angry, but you probably felt a sense of calm inside yourself as I did that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's happening inside your brain is that I'm lending you my prefrontal cortex for the time it takes for your prefrontal cortex to re-engage with what's known as your emotional database and start making sense out of what's happening. And the brain scanning studies show, there have been 17 studies, first one in 2007 out of Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA. It shows that when you label emotions in the way that I just demonstrated, the emotional centers of the brain are inhibited, while the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the executive function of our brain, is activated. So we get 2 benefits. One, the emotional centers are calmed down. At the same time, we start thinking again. And it all happens within 90 seconds. And it happens every single time without fail. This has never failed anybody that I've ever taught. It's never failed me. It always works because it's the way our brains are hardwired.
What if you get the label wrong?
Doesn't matter. Usually you're not wrong. So supposing this happens, this is very common. Oh, Rob, you were really pissed off. And you come back and you say, no, I'm frustrated, right? All right. So I'll say, oh, okay, you're really frustrated. And you don't feel like you're being listened to, and you don't feel like you're being heard, and you feel unappreciated, and you just kind of roll off the other emotions. And then you come back and say, and man, you are really angry. And you will say, yes, I'm really angry. So 2 things happen. Almost always you don't get it wrong. But what's happening is because the person who's so angry, so emotionally active, the emotional centers are so activated, they can't process the fact that they're angry. And so they'll deny it. And they'll give you something else. They'll tell you, no, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated, or no, I'm not angry, I'm sad, or whatever it might be. And you just immediately repeat back what they give you. And they will self-correct. It happens all the time. And people never get angry. People never get upset because you apparently make a mistake and mislabel an emotion. They never get upset. They're actually happy that you're sitting there trying to understand what they're feeling. Wow. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've been getting this wrong all along, because my immediate reaction when I'm faced with anger is actually to take a step back and just step out of that situation.
So, and that's becoming defensive, withdrawing, or apologizing, or appeasing, or rationalizing, or excusing, or justifying, or trying to explain. All of those defensive mechanisms that we use with angry people only make things worse. What the angry person needs, what any emotional person needs, whether it's anger or any other emotion, including happy emotions, is to be heard at a deep level, to have that emotional experience validated.
Yeah,
and when you do that, everything changes. Everything changes.
Fascinating. You've put this to test over many, many years, and you've obviously got a lot of research that sits behind it, but it's just 90 seconds you can calm somebody. Why is this not known wider?
Well, I scratch my head. It hasn't been widely spread because a couple of reasons. One, it's brand new science. I mean, the seminal study came out in 2000. I discovered this in 2005, and the seminal study that supports the work came out in 2007. So it hasn't even been out 15 years. So that's part of the problem. It's new knowledge. The second problem is that this idea of affect labeling, which is the technical name of what this is, flies in the face of everything that has been taught about listening over the last 60, 70 years. A guy by the name of Thomas Gordon, who was a protege of Carl Rogers, the great mid-20th century humanist psychologist, developed the term active listening. He invented that term. And his work, unfortunately, was misconstrued by people in the human potential movement in the 1960s, and it's been misconstrued ever since. And so you'll hear people say that, to use an I statement. Even today, psychologists and psychiatrists and media, people in my profession, will use this I statement, and they'll say something like, "Gee, Rob, what I really think you're feeling is that you're angry." And that never works, and it never has worked. But because people are not willing to look at the neuroscience because they think it's too difficult to understand, this has not made its way into mainstream thinking in the therapeutic professions or in the peacemaking professions. I'm left there being the guy who is talking about this, wrote a book about it, has proven it over and over and over again, how powerful it is. And it's slowly getting out there. And I'm teaching people how to teach this. And, I'm hopeful that in 10 or 15 years, this will be much more mainstream. This is why I do all these podcasts, to get this information out to people.
Yeah, incredibly valuable. I mean, I read somewhere that you kind of stumbled across this by experience.
I did. The story, very briefly, was that I was in a mediation in Santa Barbara, California, mediating a problem between a divorced couple. And they were so angry at each other that if there'd been knives on the table, there would be blood on the floor. Oh. And they were screaming vile obscenities at each other. And here are these well-dressed, upper middle class people, just going crazy. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do? I don't know how to handle this. And the thought came to me, because I'd done so much studying, the thought finally came to me, listen to the emotions. So that's what I had them do. And I started with the woman, Susan, and I said, Susan, I don't want you to tell me what John is saying. What I want you to do is tell me what John is feeling. What emotions is he experiencing? And so she struggled with it. And I coached her a little bit because I didn't know what I was doing either. and I coached her through it. And all of a sudden, the temperature in the room calmed way down. I mean, 3 minutes ago, the woman was a victim, and now all of a sudden she was empowered. And John completely calmed down in like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. So we got all the way through John telling his story and Susan affect labeling. I didn't know that term at the time, but basically reflecting back his emotions and feelings. I had them reverse roles. When John was finished and labeling Susan's story, he put his face in his hands and he started to sob, really deep, racking sobs.
Wow.
And he finally looked up at her and said, "That's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years.
Wow.
Wow was right. My jaw dropped. So they completely ignored me. They settled their lawsuit by just agreed to dismiss it because it was, and recognized how stupid and silly it was. Got up, walked out, holding hands to have lunch with each other. And 3 hours before, like I said, there would have been blood on the floor if there'd been knives on the table. And I said, "Holy crap, what just happened?" And I thought about it. I knew what I'd done. So I said, "Nah, can't be it." So I started testing it in other conflicts where I was mediating, and I got the same result.
Wow.
And that's how it started. And then the study came out just serendipitously. Lieberman published his brain scanning study in 2007,
Wow.
which showed the science behind all of this.
I mean, the world could use a bit of mediation at this moment in time, but you're already using this for making really positive impact in the prison system. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So in 2009, my dear friend and colleague, Laurel Coffer, who's a mediator in Los Angeles, received a letter from a woman serving a life sentence without possibility of parole in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California. And she gave me a call because I'm a secondary black belt and I live about an hour and 15 minutes from the prison. And she read the letter to me and said, "What do you think?" And I thought, I think we should do this. So it took us 6 months to get the permissions to start the program and write the curriculum. And the foundation of the curriculum was affect labeling, deep reflective listening, learning how to listen to and reflect back the emotions of another person. Because I knew from 5 years of experience that it was the only thing that I had ever discovered that really calmed people down. And we're walking into violence. And so if we're going to teach these women how to be peacemakers and mediators, they need to have a tool that works first time, every time, without fail, to calm down problems. And it worked. It was amazing what happened. About 6 weeks into I'll tell two stories. 5 weeks into the program, we walked into this dingy conference room where we were training. Prisons are not pleasant places to teach at all. And one of our students, Sarah, was there early, and she was quietly sobbing in the back. And so we walked over to her, and Laurel kneeled next to her and said, "Sarah, what's going on?" And she told us the story. She said, "I've been in prison for 18 years. I killed a family of 4 as a drunk driver. And in that accident, I was unscathed. I had to give up my 3-year-old son to my sister to raise. And I've written to him every single week since I've been in prison. And I never heard from him. Earlier this week, I decided to write a letter to affect labeling, do exactly what you guys have been training us to do in terms of listening to each other. And today, for the first time in 18 years,
Wow.
I received a letter from him. Not only that, at the end of the letter, he said, "I love you, Mom. And I'm bringing my girlfriend and we'll come visiting you in 3 weeks." And then she started crying again. And wow was right. I was just floored by that story. So then the next week, 6 weeks, we come in. Now, these women were 15 women, all types of ethnicities. Most of them all had killed a human being for one reason or another. They'd all been horribly abused outside of prison, which is why they were in prison. And they were black thorns when we first met them. And they were looking at me like evil incarnate, big white guy, lawyer, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant guy. I mean, everything bad thing that ever happened to them looked like me. So it was a very humbling experience for me. But in week 6, it shifted. Instead of coming into this room with these women who were really guarded and defensive and angry, it was like we walked in and all of a sudden these beautiful roses were in this room. They were laughing, they were open, they were vulnerable, they were accepting. I mean, like overnight, somebody had flipped a switch inside them and all of a sudden they'd gotten in touch with their humanity and became real human beings. And from that point forward, the whole project was just magical. And they stopped gang riots and rapes and murders. And We got an unsolicited letter from the warden of that prison saying it was no longer a violent prison, that our peacemakers had quieted the place down. So that was in 2010 to 2013. Today, without going through the long story today, of course, the pandemic shut down our in-person programming, but this last year we have filmed our entire curriculum, 40 hours of curriculum, onto video. And it'll be ready probably by midsummer, that anybody that wants to do Prison of Peace anywhere in the world will be able to do it. We can subtitle everything in whatever language. So we're really excited about that. I and our trainers have trained over 20,000 inmates in California alone.
Wow.
We've got a project going in Greece, 12 prisons in Greece, a project in north of Milan in Italy, and another project going on in Kenya. And we expect it to continue to grow nationally and internationally. And then here's the cool thing. We've had about 3,000 of our students released on parole in California, and we don't have one report of reoffending or recidivism.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
It's really cool.
Yeah, really cool. I mean, it must give you a great sense of gratification, but
well,
yeah,
here's something that I think relates to your path and your message. You talk, when I looked at your website, you were all about finding meaning and purpose in life. And I did too.
Yeah. And
this prison project taught me that service to humanity is the real meaning. This is what Viktor Frankl wrote about. And learning how to serve others, even in small ways, is the real meaning of life. It's not about making money. It's not about driving a big car, having a big house. It's about how can you help other people live better lives. And that's what gives meaning to life. And it's given meaning to your life, and it's given meaning to my life. And the Prison of Peace Project is just one manifestation of that.
Yeah, I mean, simply phenomenal. I want to talk about the first step, learn how to ignore angry words. Now, that's, 1, 2, 3 looks pretty simple in 90 seconds, but when you're in that moment, and whether you're angry or someone's angry towards you, there's a chemical reaction, a physiological reaction in the body that you with the term is your blood boils.
Right. If you let that happen.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask you. How do we not let that happen?
So the way you practice these skills makes all the difference in the world. And I teach my students to start in very low risk social situations where there is not intense negative emotion. So for example, I'll tell my students, go into Starbucks. When you go into Starbucks and you get to the barista and you're going to give your order, before you give your order, say something like, "You are really happy today." And you're going to get a response. So you're going to put your lab coat on, metaphorically, and just observe what does this person do when you say, "You are really happy today." And invariably, the person goes, "Yeah, I'm happy today. Wow, I'm having a great day. And yesterday this happened." And all of a sudden, they'll open up and start talking to you. And you didn't ask them how they were doing. You just made a declarative statement. You are happy. Now you're going to have to label your way out because all the people behind you are going to be pissed off because you took some time. But that's how you start. You start with these, and you do this 3 or 4 times a week. You do it at restaurants when you have a server coming up and taking your order or introducing himself or herself. You say, you look at them and you let your brain figure out where are they? Are they stressed? Are they anxious? Are they tired? Are they happy? Where are they? And then you just say, "You are whatever it is." You'll get the best service of your life when you do that. And the reason that you practice in these low risk environments is to prove to yourself that when you allow your brain to absorb the emotions of another person and reflect back with a you statement what they're saying, it actually works. You actually get a positive reaction. Wow. Then after you've done that for a couple of weeks, maybe you've done it 9 or 10 times over the course of 2 weeks with perfect strangers, you start trying it out on your friends. And you don't make a big deal out of it. You just, when you're talking to them, you just read their emotions and just say, "Oh, you're really frustrated," or "You're angry," or "Oh, you're really sad," whatever it might be. Or it could be, "Oh man, you're really excited. You're really happy," because you work with positive emotions too. And again, observe what happens, observe the reaction. Then after you've done that for a while, you can start moving into the deeper end of the pool. You can start bringing it into your work. And you can start gently and gracefully and carefully bringing it into your relationships. And eventually, over a 4 to 6 week period of practicing this 3 to 4 times a week in low-risk social situations, you will begin to see the same thing over and over again. And it becomes a self-reinforcing practice, because the more you do it, the better you feel about yourself. So, wow, that really works. And it feels really good to do this. And so you'll continue to practice. And then eventually you will confront somebody who's really angry, and you will be able to ignore their words and read their emotions and reflect back their anger or whatever it is with a you statement. So it comes with practice. It's not something you can just read the book or listen to me or do. It's a skill like riding a bike. It takes a little bit of time and effort of conscious effort to practice, but it's not hard and it doesn't take long. Like I said, most people really master this in 4 to 6 weeks of diligent practice. And, if I'm coaching you, that it just makes it that much faster. For people who like to do DIY and do it yourself, read the book, grab one of my video courses and figure it out. You can do this. If you're a person who really needs more support, then, I coach people and I coach groups and organizations on how to do this stuff. Wow.
I mean, there's a couple of things here. You might have just solved the problem for small talk as well, because the way you phrase it, I'm picked up on something you said. You are really happy. What if you were to share your reflection of what you think you're seeing? You look really happy. Is it important you say you are?
I think so.
It's very assumative.
That's right. It's very direct and very declarative. I've practiced with this in many different ways. And if you want to soft pedal it, you could say something like, you seem happy. Mm. You are happy. You look happy. But saying you are happy, the more direct you can be, it seems to have the more powerful effect it has on the other person's brain, from what I can tell. The more you soft pedal it, the less the effect is. And it seems very weird, because it seems very patronizing. It seems manipulative. It seems very rude. It seems like you're very intrusive. And the other problem is you feel very vulnerable when you do this, because you're exposing yourself. Yeah. And that's scary. It's very scary. And the reason for this, and I think this is important for people to understand, is that we live in a culture that for 4,000 years has lived under a myth, under a lie. And that myth or that lie is that we're rational beings. You go all the way back past the Greeks, and philosophers and theologians have said over and over again, what separates humans from other animals is our ability to be rational, and emotions are bad. Well, that's because they just didn't have the science that we have today. The truth is, based on neuroscience, is that we're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. And what separates us from other animals is not our rationality, it's our emotions. We are the only species on the planet that has emotions. Mm. And that goes back, this is all based on evolutionary biology and how we evolved as hominids over millions of years. We only had vocabulary. We've only been able to speak words less than 230,000 years ago. And how we communicated before that was through emotional expression and grunts. And so our brains are finely tuned, hardwired to read and understand other people's emotions as a form of communication. And yet we live in a society and a culture that says that's bad, that's evil, it's wrong. Emotions are weak. Emotions will allow you to be exploited. Being vulnerable is bad. Emotions are irrational. Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, the man who created the Catholic theology, he's a Neoplatonist. The Catholic theology is based on Platonism, not on the Bible. And he wrote that the only way to get to heaven is through reason. And then there was a footnote. And by the way, women can't reason, only men can reason. Which was part of the justification for all of the abuse over thousands and thousands of years. There's a whole theological argument for subjugation of women. And it's awful, but it's out there. And part of it was based on because of this myth. Yeah. So we got to let go of the myth. If people don't take anything else away from what they teach, just recognize we're emotional beings. And once you recognize that, Then when you see this angry person, all of a sudden you realize they're not being irrational. They're not being crazy. They're just emotional.
Mm-hmm.
I know how to deal with emotions. I just got to reflect them back. It's super simple.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many areas. I think about bullying at school. I always think that,
Absolutely.
now I look back and I think bullying was just fear expressed in
Exactly.
an outwardly way. But yeah, something I found on the website while I was looking around and doing a bit of research is I found this quite interesting. Transform anger into loyalty in 5 steps. So I wondered if you could talk us through that.
Well, it's just another way. It's another way of me explaining the power of what we're talking about here. If you have, let's suppose you're a leader in an organization and you got some people who are angry and you need them to be loyal. The way that you're going to do that is to affect label them, listen to their emotions and reflect back their emotions. And then when they quiet down, you're going to engage them in possibly problem-solving exercises or problem-solving processes to find out what is really underneath the anger, and is there anything that can be done to fix that? And when, as a leader, you take the time to do that, even if you can't come up with a solution that's going to work 100%, your followers are so grateful that you've de-escalated them and you've taken the time to try to understand the problem and look for solutions, that they will follow you anywhere. You build instant loyalty.
Wow.
And that's phenomenal to watch too. I've trained a lot of leaders how to do this, and they all report to a person. This is like magic.
Wow. It just feels like I want to take this message and get it as wide as possible, because it's just
I want you to do that too.
It's like a light bulb moment. Yeah.
It's incredible how it works. I mean, it sounds too good to be true, but it's not. It's based on hard science. And anybody who's listening can write me, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of the seminal study, or you can actually Google it. Just Google affect labeling, Matthew Lieberman, putting feelings into words. And you can, it's a PDF if you know how to read a brain scanning study. You can read this. It's not that difficult. You got to school yourself a little bit, but that's the seminal study that's the basis for all of this. But the other thing that's really amazing is that when parents use this on their children, they start labeling their children's emotions at a very young age. The studies are showing that by 9 and 10 and 11 years old, children whose parents have affect labeled them are 2 and 3 grade levels ahead of their peers.
Wow.
They're the most popular, they're the most social, and they're the most emotionally mature kids in their classes. And that's because what's happening is the affect labeling is helping the emotional centers of the brain mature rapidly. And if you don't do that, then that development does not occur in the way that it does with kids who have parents who are coaches and help them understand their emotions.
When I grew up, my parents were missionaries, and we had troubled teens in our home growing up. And you mentioned you went on my website, you've probably seen that I faced some really difficult situations, and some of those were really violent. And guy twice my size, 5 years my senior, coming at you physically. To this is all well and good, and I'm sure you face this in the prison system as well. It's all well and good if it's emotion, but if it's physical, it kind of falls to the side, right?
That's a different game. That's a different game. Now, I'm a martial artist, secondary black belt, and a Tai Chi master. So you come at me, it's not going to be well for you, even at my more advanced age. But if you don't have that kind of training, then obviously you have to protect yourself and withdraw. We're only talking about de-escalating pre-violence. Although I have to say that my students, my incarcerated students, have been able to de-escalate some very serious problems in prison before they erupted into violence. They would have otherwise gone to violence, and they were able to stop that. So if you can catch it before the violence starts, you can almost always calm things down. Once the violence starts, this will not work, and you have to resort to force to protect yourself and to defend yourself than to escape.
It feels like the police system could also use this on a de-escalating highly charged situations.
What's really interesting, you're absolutely right. And what's really interesting is I have talked to a lot of enforcement agencies about this. And what I've learned is that in their police officer standards training called POST, which is in every state in North America and also in the provinces in Canada, they're all required to have a significant amount of de-escalation training. But every law enforcement person I've trained in this who goes back and goes through their training says, oh, this training is crap. Why don't we bring Noll in here? And it turns out that the training officers are not interested in really teaching de-escalation. They think the only way to solve problems is through force. And they want to teach their officers how to protect themselves and anticipate violence. And that's where their emphasis is. And they're not training their officers in proper de-escalation strategies, even though you would think that if law enforcement officers have these skills, that the incidence of violence would be a lot less. And it would be. But that's just not the culture. The culture is violent. It's a police culture is to protect against violence by counter-violence, counter-aggression, or prevent it in the first place by dominance, not de-escalate somebody and calm them down and then figure out what to do next.
Yeah.
It's sad, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, it certainly is. And hopefully critical thinking kicks in and evolution starts to take place. Talking about evolution, the study of the brain, I mean, it's a fascinating topic for me. I'm learning something today that I can't, I'm stunned by. I guess I'm a bit speechless by, how much do we not know about the brain? It intrigues me a lot. What do you think?
Well, we know a heck of a lot more today in the first quarter of the 21st century than we knew 25 or 30 years ago. There's still a lot to be learned. But we've got the basic outline of how the brain functions pretty well understood. And this whole idea of the social interaction between human beings, what would be called in social psychology or social neuropsychology, that's where Lieberman's work is. Mm-hmm. How is it that we interact with each other, and how do brains interact with each other? And that's kind of the next big thing, because up until very recently, when you did a brain scanning study like what's known as a functional magnetic resonance imaging study or fMRI study, you were all by yourself in this tunnel, and the people were watching the blood oxygen levels in your brain. And when the theory is that when the parts of the brain are activated, the blood flows there, and with these gigantic magnets, they can make the hemoglobin in the blood, which has iron in it, line up, and they can see it. They can see where the iron molecules are, the iron atoms in the blood, and so presumably that's where the brain activity is. But that only works. That has only worked for just looking at how one brain works. But what happens if you can get 2 or 3 brains interacting with each other and measure what's going on in the brain or observe what's going on in the brain in the social interaction? And that's where the cutting edge is going to be. There's some new technology coming out that will allow scientists to study people interacting with each other and watching what happens in their brains. And then from there, figuring out what are the circuits that are involved in all of this, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, for years we thought genetics played a much bigger role than what it did, and then we're also big products of our environment. If we can crack the code, like you have with de-escalation, if we can crack the code of the brain, that you could think of a lot of social situations that could be resolved in the world. I wanted to ask a question that I ask everyone who comes on the Grind Academy, which is, if you could rewind and Doug was a child before he went to school, and you could change the curriculum knowing what you know now, and you could be taught something to set you up for life that is not taught at school, what would 3 things be?
I think that, first of all, having either a parent, which I had parents, but they were not able to do what I needed, or teachers, and teachers are not trained in this either, but having either parents and teachers who are emotionally competent individuals that could coach me from a very young age, from 2 or 3 years old, how to manage my own emotions by teaching me by affect labeling me, reflecting, helping me build an emotional database, and not telling me to shut up or to not cry or to be a big boy, to not deny me my emotions, but to be present with my emotions and model for me what emotional competency looks like and what an emotionally competent adult is. Would have cut my learning journey by 50 years. So I think learning emotional competency skills, how to be aware of your emotions, how to emotionally self-regulate, and how to reflect the emotions of other people, which is called cognitive empathy. Learning those skills at a young age would have been huge. Those are probably the three things that would have made the biggest difference in my life. I was born with a lot of disabilities. I was born almost blind, deaf, 2 club feet, crippled, couldn't walk till I was 3 years old. I mean, I was born with a lot of problems. So I had to overcome those problems on my own. I got no support, very little support from my parents. They just told me to toughen up and make it happen and don't complain. So I got no emotional support and very little physical support, because who wants to teach a blind, deaf, crippled kid who's left-handed how to toss a baseball or how to catch a football? Nobody had the patience for that back in the 50s. So maybe that's the second thing that I think would be really important, is having really good coaches and teachers who could work with me and work with the disabilities, help me overcome my disabilities, and learn how to learn at a much earlier age without the pain and the struggle that I had to go through, and probably would have accelerated my emotional development as well as my physical development in much more rapidly than it did. I mean, ultimately I overcame it all, but not without a lot of pain and suffering.
Yeah. I just want to qualify that, by the way. I'm very pro education. I think the question that I'm asking on the Grind Academy is, what could we add to a system that, everyone's doing the best they can with what they've got? How can we make it better? So I just want to qualify that I'm not anti-education here.
Oh no, and let me tell you, I am not either. And let me just share this. I was a child of the 50s and the 60s, and I was blessed by living in a good school, one of the best school districts in California, and having teachers, primarily women, who were geniuses.
Yeah.
And why were they geniuses in teaching? It was because in those days they had no other opportunity. And when the opportunity for women opened up in the 60s and 70s, which I think is a really good thing, there was an unintended consequence. And that is, the best and the brightest no longer went into teaching. They went into medicine or law or engineering or business, and still have their problems, their glass ceilings. But what happened was there was a mediocrity set into teaching. And we didn't, as a society, we're not compensating teachers enough. There's not enough compensation and benefits to pull in the best and the brightest. Why become a teacher making $40 or $50 or $60,000 a year? If you're smart enough, you can be a lawyer, and out of the gate, out of law school, you're making $120,000 a year.
Yeah.
Where's the incentive for our best people to become teachers? So today, although teaching is an honorable profession, and there are a lot of people who are very good at it, the best and the brightest are not going into teaching for the most part. So one of the things I think we have to do is we have to revise our spending priorities about where do we want to put the money. And to me, putting the money into education to attract really smart young people and turn them into master teachers and teach them how to be emotionally competent so they can model emotional competency to their students is money well spent.
Yeah, it feels like a logical model of evolution, human evolution.
Right, exactly.
To do so. Well, I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation. And what I wanted to just acknowledge is, your life's work is making such a big change in the world. And that's such a gift to all of us, but I'm sure provides a lot of sense, a lot of source of satisfaction for yourself as well. So I want to say thank you for showing up and sharing such valuable information that I can't wait to get out there and share with as many people as I possibly can. And I just wanted to ask if anyone wants to get in touch with you or follow you and follow your progress in this topic, how can they reach you?
My email address is doug@dougnoll, DOUGNOLL.com. I am a solopreneur. I don't have a staff. I don't have virtual assistants or physical assistants or anything. What you see is what you get. I answer all my own emails. So if anybody can, feel free to email me. My basic website is dougnoll.com. But for your audience, I put a webpage up with a different link, and that is dougnoll.co/grind-academy. And on that page, you can get a free ebook. Give me your email address. You get the ebook, which talks about everything we've talked about today. You can buy a copy of my book. You can get access to buy my basic De-escalate video course. And if you really want to invest in yourself, you can spend a little bit more money and develop your emotional competency with my basic and advanced emotional competency courses. So that address is dougnoll.co/grind-academy.
Thank you.
And that's what I make available to your audience, to everybody who's listening today.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you so much for that. And we'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. So anyone who's listening or watching can check the show notes, and those links will be there. Doug, I wanted to say thank you once more. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom today.
Thank you, Rob. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Absolutely. Me too. Thank you.
All right.
One thing today that can change the world is to share this message. Please send it to a friend, post it on social media, introduce the technique to your workplace. Get in touch with Doug, follow his blogs, visit the website and download the free ebook. Buy his De-escalate book or enroll in the course. Check out the show notes for the link. So I want everyone to see what this content is all about. I want to thank Doug for joining the podcast and sharing his knowledge gained from years of research, study, and real-world experience. If you liked the podcast or you think someone could hear this message, I'm sure you do, and you can take value from it, please share it widely and don't forget to write a review, because that's how more people will hear this message. The podcast was designed with one idea in mind, and that's to share practical life skills not taught at school. Thank you for listening to the Grind Academy today. I want to wish you a fantastic week ahead. Remember to go out there with full intention, keep dreaming, keep grinding, and never, ever give up.